I have a project for dealing with African debt called the DOVE Fund. DOVE stands for the Debts of Vulnerable Economies Fund. And the DOVE Fund is an attempt to come up with an innovative approach to Africa's debt, its bond debt, its Eurobond debt. About a third of the continent's debt is Eurobonds, and they're much more expensive. The interest rate's much higher than other African debt. And it's much harder to deal with that because there's so many people who hold, or institutions that hold the debt. And so this is an attempt to come up with a new way of dealing with that. It's based on the assumption that most of the approaches that people suggest for dealing with debt, such as debt forgiveness, are based on the assumption that you can convince the creditors to be kind and to show goodwill. And we know from history that that's not going to happen. So the DOVE Fund is saying we need to change that approach and try shake up the dynamics amongst the creditors so that they're more responsive and more open to new ways of dealing with the debt. And the way to do that is to create a fund that will become a creditor, and so that it has the right to participate in the creditor negotiations. And so the DOVE Fund is a fund that will be established. Everyone can invest in the DOVE Fund, from individuals in Africa to supporters around the world, to foundations, to church groups, to companies, to multilateral institutions. And the DOVE Fund will then buy the debt of a country in distress, and it will say upfront publicly, we will not agree to any rescheduling of the debt until unless the agreement conforms to a set of international principles called the DOVE Fund Principles. And the DOVE Fund Principles are based on about 20 different standards that range from the Afro-DAD Harare Declaration to the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights to the Institute for International Finance, which represents the banking group's principles. And the idea is that these principles promote a sustainable, inclusive. They insist on compliance with human rights standards, environmental and social standards, and they will produce an outcome that will give Africa the space that it needs to re-establish and pay for its own development, but also maintain access to new financing, because Africa will need new debts to deal with its development in the future. And the truth is that most of the bond holders, so the pension funds, the investment companies, have human rights and environmental and social policies that they include many of these principles. And many of them have signed up to some version of these principles. And the idea is that we're just saying, live up to what you've already said you were going to do. You must agree to these. We can come up with ways that you will benefit from this. If African countries get over their debt problems and develop, the chances of you getting repaid are better. And Africa develops, and so there'll be new opportunities. And so it's in everybody's interest to do this. We're now in the process of testing the feasibility of this. We've tested the versions of the principles and the ideas with some investment experts, and so far the response is positive, but it's still in the testing phase. But I think what we managed is clear is that everybody agrees a new approach is needed, but it has to be a new creative approach, and that's what the DOVE Fund is designed to do.
And so what do you anticipate the testing period to be, if all goes as planned? But I think by the end of this year we should have done enough testing to be able to say the idea that there are people who are interested in investing in this or who not. I mean, that's, if you're testing the feasibility, it's possible it's not feasible. We also plan to do a test case, so to pick a country that's in crisis as the test case to prove that it can work, even if we can show that it's feasible, and then we can scale it up and say this is for the whole continent. Because if we start too big, I think we might fail just because it's too big a project to succeed.
policies and practices that put people first. We call for policies and practices that put people first.